Hey everyone, imagine this. You're out in the wild, the kind of place where the trees whisper secrets and the wind carries stories no one's ever heard. A young couple, hand in hand, sets out for a hunting trip, their loyal dog trotting beside them, tail wagging like it's just another adventure. They're laughing, planning their day, maybe dreaming about the life they're building together. But then they vanish. No trace, no clue, just gone. Swallowed by the forest. 2 years pass, and everyone's given up hope, until one day, their dog stumbles back into town alone, looking like it's seen things no animal should. Where's the couple? What happened out there? And why did the dog come back now? That's the mystery we're diving into today, but hold on, because this story's got another twist. A chance encounter on a crowded bus, where a simple act of kindness sparks something no one saw coming. A black teen gives up his seat for a pregnant white woman, and what she hands him in return changes his life forever. Two stories, worlds apart, but somehow connected. Stick with me because this is going to keep you up at night wondering. Out in the dense woods of northern Maine, where the pines stretch so tall they seem to scrape the sky, Sarah and Ethan were the kind of couple everyone envied. They were young, maybe mid-20s, with that glow you get when you're in love and life feels like it's just beginning. Sarah had this infectious laugh, the kind that made strangers smile, and Ethan was quieter, steady, the guy who'd carry her backpack without complaint. They'd been together since high school, saving up for a little house, talking about kids someday. Hunting was their thing, not for trophies, but for the quiet of it, the way it brought them closer to each other and to nature. Their dog, Rusty, a scruffy mutt with soulful brown eyes, was always with them, bounding through the underbrush, sniffing out trails. That fall morning in 2022, they packed their gear, kissed their families goodbye, and headed into the wilderness, promising to be back by Sunday. It was just another trip, nothing special. Except they never came home. The town of Millinocket, where they lived, is small. Everyone knows everyone. When Sarah and Ethan didn't show up, folks didn't panic at first. Maybe they got lost or their truck broke down. But as days turned into weeks, worry crept in like a fog. Search parties combed the forest, helicopters buzzed overhead, and volunteers shouted their names until their throats were raw. Nothing. No footprints, no campsite, no sign of their gear. It was like the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. Rusty was gone too, which broke people's hearts even more. That dog would have died before leaving them, Sarah's mom said, tears in her eyes. The police had no leads. Some thought they'd run off to start a new life, but their bank accounts were untouched, their phones silent. Others whispered about foul play, or maybe a bear attack, though no remains were found. The wildest rumors talked about something else, something unnatural, like the forest itself had claimed them. By the second year, the town had mostly moved on, though Sarah and Ethan's family still put up flyers, yellowed and curling at the edges. Then, one chilly morning in October 2024, something happened that turned the whole mystery upside down. A logger driving down a back road near the forest spotted a dog limping along, half-starved, its fur matted with burrs. He stopped, thinking it was a stray, but when he got closer, his jaw dropped. It was Rusty. The collar was still there, faded but unmistakable, with Sarah's phone number scratched into the tag. The town exploded with questions. How had Rusty survived 2 years out there? Where were Sarah and Ethan? The dog was too weak to bark, but his eyes, those same soulful eyes, seemed to carry a story he couldn't tell. Vets patched him up, and he'd whine softly, like he was trying to explain. People started searching the woods again, hoping Rusty's return meant answers. But the forest stayed silent, and the mystery only deepened. Some folks swore Rusty led them to a spot deep in the woods, a clearing where the air felt wrong. No evidence, just a feeling. What had Rusty seen? And why had he come back alone? Now let's shift gears for a second, because life has a funny way of weaving stories together. Down in Atlanta, around the same time Sarah and Ethan vanished, a kid named Jamal was just trying to get through his day. He was 17, a high school senior, the kind of guy who kept his head down, but always noticed the little things. Jamal grew up in a tough neighborhood, but he had big dreams. maybe college, maybe a job where he could make his mom proud. One afternoon, he's on a packed city bus, standing room only, when he sees a pregnant woman struggling to keep her balance. She's white, maybe in her 30s, looking exhausted, her hands cradling her belly. Without thinking twice, Jamal offers her a seat. It's no big deal to him, just what you do. But she smiles, grateful, and they get to talking. Her name's Emily, and she's got this quiet strength, like she's been through a lot but keeps going. Before she gets off the bus, she scribbles something on a scrap of paper and hands it to Jamal. "Read this later," she says, her eyes serious. He stuffs it in his pocket, not thinking much of it, until he reads it that night and realizes his whole world's about to change. What was in that note? How does a random act of kindness tie back to a couple lost in the woods and a dog that came back from the dead? I know, it sounds crazy, but trust me, these stories are linked in ways you won't believe. Sarah and Ethan's disappearance isn't just a mystery, it's a puzzle with pieces scattered across time and place. Was it an accident, or is there something darker at play? Did Rusty find his way back to tell us something, or is he running from it? And Jamal, what did that note say, and why did Emily choose him? I've got chills just thinking about it. We're going to dig into every detail, every clue, and try to figure out what connects these moments. But for now, I'll leave you with this. The truth is out there, waiting, and it's stranger than you think. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's unravel this together in the next part. What do you think happened to Sarah and Ethan? And what's in Jamal's note? Drop your theories in the comments. I'm dying to know. So here we are, hanging on the edge of two stories that seem worlds apart but feel like they're tied by some invisible thread. Sarah and Ethan, lost in the wilds of Maine, their dog Rusty coming back alone after 2 years, carrying secrets in his tired eyes. And Jamal, a kid from Atlanta, holding a note that's about to flip his life upside down. I can feel you leaning in, wondering how these pieces fit. Let's dive deeper into the shadows of this mystery, peel back the layers of these lives, and see what clues we can find. But don't expect answers yet. The truth is still hiding, and every step we take only makes the puzzle more tangled. Back in Millinocket, the day Rusty showed up was like a spark in a dry forest. The whole town buzzed with hope, fear, and 100 questions no one could answer. Rusty was skin and bones, his fur patchy, but those eyes, they held something heavy, like he'd seen too much. The logger who found him, a guy named Tom, said he'd been driving the same back road for years and never saw anything like it. That dog looked like he was running from something, Tom told the local paper, his voice shaky. Not towards something, but away. He took Rusty to the vet, and soon Sarah's family was there, crying and hugging the dog like he was their last piece of her. Ethan's dad, a quiet man who'd barely spoken since his son disappeared, just stared at Rusty, like he was searching for Ethan in the dog's matted fur. They fed him, cleaned him up, but Rusty wasn't the same. He'd always been a happy mutt, chasing his tail, begging for scraps. Now he'd sit by the window, staring at the woods, whimpering like he was waiting for something or someone. The town rallied to search again. Volunteers came out in droves, combing the forest with new energy. They followed Rusty, hoping he'd lead them to Sarah and Ethan, but he'd only go so far before stopping, trembling, at a clearing about 5 miles from where they'd last been seen. It was a strange spot, even for those who knew the woods. The trees there grew in a near-perfect circle, the ground bare except for a carpet of pine needles. No birds sang, no squirrels chattered. Just silence, thick and heavy, like the air was holding its breath. It felt wrong. One searcher said later, rubbing his arms like he could still feel the chill. They found nothing, no clothes, no gear, not even a scrap of evidence. But Rusty wouldn't leave that clearing. He'd lie down, nose pressed to the ground, and whine. Some folks started whispering about old legends, stories of the forest taking what it wanted. Maine's woods are old, older than the towns built around them, and they hold secrets no one's ever explained. Had Sarah and Ethan stumbled into something they shouldn't have? Back when they disappeared, the police had done their best. Sheriff Danvers, a gruff guy with a soft spot for the couple, led the first searches. He'd known Sarah since she was a kid, always tagging along with her dad to the hardware store. Ethan, he'd coached in high school football, said he was the kind of player who'd give you everything, even if it meant limping off the field. Danvers didn't believe the runaway theories. Those kids loved their families, he'd said at a town meeting. And they loved that dog. No way they'd leave Rusty behind. He'd combed through their lives, bank records, phone logs, even their social media. Nothing. Their last post was a selfie from the trailhead, Sarah grinning with her arm around Ethan, Rusty photobombed in the corner with his tongue out. The timestamp was 7:42 a.m., October 15th, 2022. After that, silence. Their phones never pinged a tower again. Their truck was found parked at the trailhead, keys still in the ignition. It was like they'd stepped into another world. Theories started piling up. Some said they'd gotten lost, maybe fallen into a ravine. The woods in northern Maine are brutal. Miles of unmarked trails, bogs that can swallow you whole, and winters that don't forgive. But Sarah and Ethan weren't rookies. They'd hunted those woods since they were teens, knew every ridge and stream. Others thought maybe a bear or a mountain lion got them, though no one found blood or bones. A few locals, the ones who'd lived there long enough to know the old stories, talked quieter. They mentioned the Algonquin legends, tales of spirits that guard the forest, luring people who stray too far. The woods don't always give back what they take, an old trapper named Amos said, his eyes distant. Most laughed it off, but when Rusty came back alone, those stories didn't seem so funny anymore. What had he seen out there? And why hadn't he stayed with Sarah and Ethan, the people he loved? Meanwhile, down in Atlanta, Jamal was dealing with his own mystery. That note from Emily was burning a hole in his pocket as he rode the bus home that day. He didn't open it right away. Too many eyes around, and besides, he was tired from a long shift at the corner store where he worked after school. Jamal was the kind of kid who didn't make waves. He was tall, lanky, with a quick smile and a habit of helping people without expecting anything back. His mom, Denise, raised him alone, working double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat. Jamal wanted to make her proud, maybe get a scholarship, get out of the neighborhood where gunshots weren't uncommon at night. He'd been saving for college, putting away every dollar he could, but it never felt like enough. That day on the bus, when he gave Emily his seat, he wasn't thinking about changing his life. He just saw someone who needed help. Emily, though, wasn't just any stranger. She had a quiet intensity, like she was carrying a weight no one could see. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her clothes plain but neat, and her eyes, they locked onto Jamal's like she was sizing him up. Their conversation was short, just small talk about the weather, the crowded bus, her due date a few months out. But there was something about her, a kind of urgency, like she was searching for the right words but couldn't find them. When she handed him the note, her hand lingered for a second, and she said, "Don't lose this." Jamal nodded, confused but polite, and watched her disappear into the crowd at her stop. It wasn't until he got home, sitting on his bed with the street lights buzzing outside, that he unfolded the scrap of paper. The words hit him like a punch. They weren't what he expected. Not a thank you, not a phone number, but something else entirely, something that made his heart race and his mind spin. What did the note say? "I know you're dying to know, but let's hold off because this is where things get weirder." Jamal didn't tell anyone about it, not even his mom. He tucked it into his wallet, behind his school ID, and carried it everywhere. He'd pull it out when he was alone, rereading it, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just words, it was a promise, a challenge, maybe even a warning. He started noticing things after that day. A car parked too long across the street, a man in a gray jacket who seemed to show up wherever Jamal went. Was he being watched? Or was he just paranoid, the note messing with his head? He didn't know Emily, had never seen her before, but now she felt like a ghost in his life, her words pulling him towards something he didn't understand. Back in Maine, the search for Sarah and Ethan was hitting dead ends. Rusty's return had lit a fire, but the forest wasn't talking. Sheriff Danvers brought in experts, trackers, even a guy with a drone who mapped the area from above. They found nothing but trees and rocks. The clearing where Rusty kept going back became the focus. Some volunteers refused to go near it, saying it gave them headaches or made their skin crawl. Others, like Sarah's brother, Jake, weren't so easily spooked. Jake was 19, a freshman in college when his sister vanished. He dropped out after, unable to focus, haunted by the thought that he should have gone with them that day. Now he was out there every weekend, searching, calling Sarah's name until his voice gave out. When Rusty led him to the clearing, Jake felt it too, that strange, heavy air. But he didn't care. He'd dig up the whole forest if it meant finding his sister. Jake started noticing things the others missed. A faint mark on a tree, like someone had carved it years ago, barely visible under the moss. A patch of ground where the pine needles seemed disturbed, like something heavy had been dragged. He took pictures, showed them to Danvers, but the sheriff sighed. Could be anything, Jake. Animals, weather, hikers. Still, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the clearing was important. He started researching, digging into old maps, local history, even those creepy legends Amos talked about. He found stories from the 1800s, loggers who'd gone missing in that same stretch of woods, never found. One account, buried in a library archive, mentioned a circle of trees, where people felt watched, like eyes were on them from the shadows. Jake didn't believe in ghosts, but he was starting to wonder if the forest was hiding more than just his sister and Ethan. In Atlanta, Jamal was wrestling with his own questions. The note had given him a name and an address, not in Atlanta, but in a small town in Maine, of all places. It wasn't Millinocket, but it was close, maybe an hour away. The name was Margaret, the address a house on Maple Lane in Baxter. The note's final line, "She knows what happened." Jamal had no idea what it meant, but it felt like a hook in his chest, pulling him north. He'd never been to Maine, didn't know anyone there, but the note made it personal. He started saving every penny, picking up extra shifts, skipping meals to afford the bus ticket. He told his mom he was visiting a friend, hated lying to her, but how could he explain? The man in the gray jacket didn't help. He was everywhere now, outside the store, at the bus stop, once even near Jamal's apartment, just watching. Jamal started carrying a pocket knife, his nerves frayed. Jake, meanwhile, was chasing his own leads. He'd started talking to Amos more, meeting him at the diner where the old man sipped coffee like it was his job. Amos didn't like talking about the legends, but Jake was relentless. "Those woods ain't normal," Amos finally said one morning, his eyes scanning the room like he was afraid someone was listening. "People go in, Don live for you, Jake," he said, his voice low. "Some never come out. And the ones that do, they ain't the same." Jake pressed him, and Amos leaned closer. "There's places in those woods where things don't add up. Old stories, maybe, but they stick with you." He gave Jake a hand-drawn map, marked with spots he called bad places. The clearing was one of them. Jake's heart raced. He'd been right, there was something off about that place. Jamal's bus ride to Maine was a blur of nerves and second thoughts. The note felt heavier with every mile, its words, Margaret, Maple Lane. She knows what happened, looping in his mind. He'd found articles about Sarah and Ethan, their smiling faces in that last selfie haunting him. How did Emily know anything about them? And why him? He hadn't told Marcus about the man in the gray jacket, didn't want to sound crazy, but the guy was real. One night, closing up the store, Jamal saw him across the street, the glow of his cigarette lighting up a face that looked too hard for comfort. Jamal ran home, checking over his shoulder, the note like a ticking bomb in his pocket. Jake wasn't giving up either. He'd shown Danvers the tree carving, but the sheriff shrugged it off. Kids, probably. Jake wasn't convinced. He went back to the clearing alone at night, Rusty trembling beside him. The moonlight made the place feel alive, the air thick with something he couldn't name. He found another mark, a circle with a slash through it, carved into a rock. His archaeology friend called it ritualistic, and Jake's stomach twisted. He didn't believe in spirits, but the forest was starting to feel like it was watching him, daring him to keep going. He bought a hunting knife, carried it everywhere, just in case. Jamal finally had enough for the ticket. He lied to his mom, packed a bag, and caught the first bus north. The city faded, replaced by endless trees and a quiet that felt alive. Baxter was tiny, just a diner and a few streets. Maple Lane was quiet, the gray house at the address looking tired, its porch sagging. Jamal stood across the street, heart pounding, the note burning in his pocket. The door opened, and an older woman stepped out, her eyes sharp. "You're late," she said, like she'd known he was coming. Who was Margaret? And how did she know? The threads are tightening. Jake chasing symbols in a haunted forest. Jamal on a stranger's porch with a note that led him here. Rusty carrying secrets he can't tell. Sarah and Ethan, still gone, their fate buried in the woods. What does Margaret know? What's waiting on that ridge? How do Atlanta's streets and Maine's wilderness connect? No answers yet. The truth's still out there, deeper than you think. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let's keep digging. What's connecting these stories? Drop your guesses below. Next part's gonna blow your mind. Margaret's voice cut through the chilly Maine air like a knife, sharp and certain, as if she'd been waiting for Jamal all along. He stood frozen on the sidewalk, the crumpled note in his pocket feeling heavier than ever. The gray house behind her looked like it was holding its breath, its windows dark, the paint peeling like old skin. "You're late," she said again, her eyes narrowing, not angry but knowing, like she could see right through him. Jamal, barely 18, felt like a kid caught sneaking out. He didn't know what to say. How do you explain a note from a stranger that dragged you 1,000 miles from home? "I got your address," he stammered, pulling the paper from his wallet. Margaret's lips twitched, not quite a smile, and she motioned him inside. "You'd better come in," she said. "We've got a lot to talk about." Jamal hesitated, glancing down Maple Lane, half expecting the man in the gray jacket to be lurking in the shadows. He wasn't, but the feeling of being watched clung to him like damp fog. He stepped through the door, and the mystery that started on a crowded Atlanta bus pulled him deeper into the unknown. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and lavender, with stacks of books and papers cluttering every surface. Margaret was older than he'd expected, maybe in her 60s, with gray hair tied back and a face lined with years of worry. She didn't offer him a seat, just pointed to a worn couch and started making tea. Moving like this was a routine she'd done 100 times. Jamal sat, clutching his bag, his mind racing. The note had said, "She knows what happened." But what did that mean? Was it about Sarah and Ethan, the couple he'd read about online, lost in the woods? Or something else entirely? Margaret set a mug in front of him, her eyes flicking to the note in his hand. "Emily sent you," she said, not a question. Jamal nodded, throat tight. "How'd you know?" he asked. She leaned back in her chair, her gaze distant. "Because she always does." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning Jamal couldn't grasp. He wanted to ask a million questions, but something in her tone told him to wait. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in, and he swore he heard a faint creak from upstairs, like someone else was in the house. Back in Millinocket, Jake was pushing deeper into the forest, driven by a need he couldn't explain. The arrow carved into the tree and the slashed circle on the rock were burned into his mind, clues that felt like they were screaming at him to keep going. He'd stopped telling Sheriff Danvers everything, not because he didn't trust him, but because the sheriff's tired sighs and "be careful" warnings weren't helping. Jake was 19, angry, and desperate, carrying the weight of his sister's disappearance like a stone in his chest. Rusty stayed close, his ears twitching at every snap of a twig, his whines a constant reminder that something was wrong. Jake had Amos's map tucked into his jacket, the bad places marked in faded ink. The ridge beyond the clearing was his next stop, a steep climb through dense pines where the air felt colder, heavier. He'd gone out alone this time, ignoring Danvers's advice, his hunting knife strapped to his belt. The forest was quiet, too quiet, and every step felt like he was crossing a line he couldn't come back from. The ridge wasn't just a hike, it was a challenge. The trail was barely a trail, overgrown with thorns that snagged at Jake's jeans. He found another mark halfway up, this one a crude spiral scratched into a boulder, fresh enough that the stone was still pale where the moss had been scraped away. His heart pounded. Someone had been here, recently. He took a picture, his hands shaking, and kept climbing. Rusty lagged behind, reluctant, his tail low. When Jake reached the top, the ridge opened into a narrow plateau, a jumble of rocks and stunted trees. In the center was a pile of stones, too neat to be natural, like someone had stacked them on purpose. Jake's breath caught. He'd heard stories, old ones from Amos and others, about cairns marking sacred places or cursed ones. He approached slowly, Rusty growling softly at his side. The stones were cold, slick with moss, and beneath them, half buried, he saw something that made his blood run cold, a piece of fabric, faded but familiar. It was the same green as Sarah's jacket. In Baxter, Margaret was finally talking, but her words only deepened the mystery. She told Jamal about Emily, the woman from the bus, but not in a way that cleared anything up. "She's a messenger," Margaret said, her voice low, like she was afraid the walls were listening. "Always has been. Finds people like you, people who'll listen." Jamal's head spun. "Listen to what?" he asked, frustration creeping in. Margaret sipped her tea, her eyes never leaving his. "To the truth about what's out there," she said, nodding toward the window, where the dark outline of the forest loomed. She wouldn't say more about Emily, only that she'd known her for years, that she always showed up when things were about to happen. Jamal pressed her about Sarah and Ethan, about the note's cryptic line, but Margaret shook her head. "It's not just about them," she said. "It's bigger. Older." She stood, pulling a dusty journal from a shelf. "This'll explain some of it," she said, handing it to him. "But you need to see it for yourself." The journal was old, its pages yellowed, filled with handwritten notes and sketches, maps, symbols, names. Jamal flipped through it, catching glimpses of words like clearing, spirits, and taken. One page had a drawing of a circle of trees, just like the one Jake had found, with a note scrawled beside it. "They don't leave. They change." His stomach twisted. He looked up at Margaret, who was watching him like she was waiting for something. "What am I supposed to do with this?" he asked. She leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Go to Millinocket. Find the clearing. But be careful, Jamal. Once you step into those woods, there's no going back." He wanted to laugh, to tell her she was crazy, but the note, the journal, the man in the gray jacket, they all felt like pieces of a puzzle he was already too deep in to escape. Jake, meanwhile, was staring at the scrap of fabric in his hands, his mind racing. It was Sarah's, no question, the same shade, the same worn stitching. He dug carefully around the stones, heart pounding, afraid of what he'd find. There was no body, no blood, just the fabric and a small, carved wooden figure, no bigger than his thumb. It was crude, shaped like a person but featureless, the wood blackened like it had been burned. He stuffed it in his pocket, his hands shaking, and looked around. The ridge felt wrong, like the clearing, too still, too quiet. Rusty was pacing, growling at nothing. Jake wanted to keep searching, but the sun was dipping low, and the idea of being out here at night made his skin crawl. He marked the spot on his map, took more pictures, and started back down, Rusty practically dragging him along. Halfway down, he heard it again, those heavy footsteps, just out of sight. He spun around, knife in hand, but no one was there. Just trees, shadows, and the weight of something watching. In Baxter, Jamal was struggling to process what Margaret had told him. The journal was heavy in his bag as he left her house, her warning echoing in his head. Millinocket was an hour away, and he had no car, no plan, just a name and a feeling that he was in over his head. He found a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and creaky beds. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, he read the journal by the light of his phone. It was written by someone named Clara, dated decades ago, and it told stories of people disappearing in the Maine woods, hunters, loggers, kids. Each one tied to a place called the Circle, where the trees grew strange and the air felt heavy. Clara wrote about guardians, things that weren't human but weren't animals either, that claimed anyone who got too close. Jamal's hands shook as he read. Was this what Emily meant? Was this what Margaret wanted him to find? The next morning, Jamal caught a bus to Millinocket, his nerves frayed. The town was small, quiet, but buzzing with tension. Posters of Sarah and Ethan still hung on telephone poles, faded but stubborn. He didn't know where to start, but the journal mentioned the clearing, and he'd overheard people at the diner talking about it, about a dog coming back alone. He found the sheriff's office, hoping for answers, but Danvers was out. A deputy, young and bored, told him the searches were winding down. "Unless you've got something new, kid, there's nothing to find," he said. Jamal didn't mention the journal or the note. He didn't trust anyone yet. Instead, he asked about the clearing, and the deputy's face changed, just for a second. "Stay away from there," he said too quickly. "It's just woods." But Jamal knew better. He bought a map from a gas station, marked the trailhead from the journal, and started walking. Jake was back at the diner, showing Amos the wooden figure. The old man's face paled when he saw it, his coffee mug trembling in his hand. "Where'd you find that?" he asked, voice low. Jake told him about the ridge, the stones, the fabric. Amos didn't look surprised, just scared. "You shouldn't have taken it," he said. "Those things, they're markers. You take one, you're marked too." Jake laughed, uneasy, but Amos wasn't joking. He told Jake about a hunter he'd known in the 70s, a guy who'd found a similar figure and started hearing voices, seeing shadows. A week later, he was gone, no trace. Jake's stomach twisted, but he didn't believe in curses. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the figure in his pocket was heavier than it should be, like it was pulling him back to the ridge. In Atlanta, Denise was starting to worry. Jamal had been vague about his trip, and now he wasn't answering his phone. She'd found a receipt from the bus station in his room, with a destination she didn't recognize, Baxter, Maine. Her heart sank. Jamal was a good kid, but he'd been acting strange since that day on the bus, secretive, jumpy. She called Marcus, who admitted Jamal had mentioned a note but wouldn't say more. Denise didn't know what her son was chasing, but she knew he was in trouble. She took a few days off work, borrowed money from her sister, and booked a flight to Maine. She wasn't losing her boy, not to some mystery she didn't understand. Jamal reached the trailhead by noon, the forest looming ahead like a wall of secrets. The map was crude, but the journal's directions were clear. Follow the stream. Look for the circle of trees. He wasn't a hiker, had never been in woods like these, and every rustle made him jump. He thought about the man in the gray jacket, wondered if he'd followed him here. The journal was in his bag, its pages full of warnings he didn't fully believe but couldn't ignore. As he walked, he saw something, a mark on a tree, an arrow, just like Jake's. His heart raced. He was on the right path, but to what? The air grew colder, heavier, and he felt eyes on him, though no one was there. He kept going, driven by the note, by Emily's words, by the feeling that he was meant to be here. Jake was back at the ridge, unable to stay away. He'd told no one about the figure, not even his parents. The fabric was in his pocket, the knife in his hand. Rusty wouldn't come this time, stayed whining at the trailhead, and that scared Jake more than anything. The cairn was still there, undisturbed, but the air felt different, like a storm was coming. He found another mark nearby, a spiral like the one on the boulder, carved into a tree. And then he heard it, a whisper, not words, just a sound, like the wind but sharper. He spun around, knife raised, but the ridge was empty. Or was it? In the shadows, just for a second, he swore he saw a figure, tall, thin, gone when he blinked. His heart pounded. Sarah? Ethan? Or something else? He didn't know, but he wasn't leaving until he found out. The threads are twisting tighter, aren't they? Jamal, alone in the woods, following a trail he doesn't understand. Jake, chasing ghosts on a ridge that feels alive. Margaret, holding secrets she won't share. Denise, racing to find her son before it's too late. And somewhere, Sarah and Ethan, still missing, their fate tied to a forest that doesn't let go. What's waiting in the clearing? What do the symbols mean? And who, or what, is watching? I'm not giving you the answers yet, because the truth is deeper, darker than you think. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's keep unraveling this. What's pulling these people together? Drop your theories below. The next part's gonna shake you. Jamal's boots crunched on the pine needles, each step pulling him deeper into the Maine woods, where the trees seemed to lean in, whispering secrets he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. The air was thick, heavy with that same strange stillness Jake had felt, and the journal in his bag felt like a lead weight. The arrow on the tree had led him here, to the edge of the clearing, where the trees formed a perfect circle, their branches tangled like they were holding hands. His heart pounded, the note from Emily burning in his pocket. She knows what happened. Margaret's warning echoed too. Once he stepped into these woods, there was no going back. He didn't believe in spirits or curses, but the clearing felt alive, watching him. A twig snapped behind him, and he spun around, his pocket knife trembling in his hand. Nothing. Just shadows. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The journal mentioned guardians, things that claimed those who got too close. Was that what took Sarah and Ethan? Was that why Rusty came back alone? Jamal took a deep breath, stepped into the clearing, and felt the air shift, like he'd crossed an invisible line. Jake was on the ridge, his breath shallow, the wooden figure in his pocket heavier than ever. The whisper he'd heard earlier was louder now, not words but a hum, like a voice trying to form. The cairn of stones loomed in front of him, the scrap of Sarah's jacket still clutched in his hand. He hadn't told anyone about it, not Amos, not his parents. The forest was closing in, the trees tighter, the light dimmer, even though the sun hadn't set. Rusty hadn't come this time, and that scared him more than the whispers. He knelt by the cairn, his hunting knife digging into the dirt, searching for anything. Another clue, a sign of his sister. The ground was hard, unyielding, but he found something else, a second wooden figure, identical to the first, blackened and featureless. His stomach dropped. Two figures, two people, Sarah and Ethan? He stood, scanning the ridge, and saw it again. That tall, thin shape in the shadows, flickering like a bad signal. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The hum stopped, replaced by silence, so deep it hurt his ears. He gripped the knife tighter, his heart racing. Whatever was out here, it wasn't human. In Atlanta, Denise was frantic. Her flight had landed in Bangor, and she'd rented a car, driving straight to Baxter, her hands shaking on the wheel. Jamal wasn't answering his phone, and the receipt for a bus ticket to Maine was all she had to go on. She'd called Marcus again, who admitted Jamal had been obsessed with a note, something about a woman named Emily and a town called Millinocket. Denise didn't know what her son was chasing, but the fear in her gut told her it was dangerous. She stopped at a gas station in Baxter, asking about a kid matching Jamal's description. The clerk, an older woman with tired eyes, remembered him, said he'd bought a map, and asked about Millinocket. "Seemed nervous," she said. Denise's heart sank. She drove toward Millinocket, the road winding through endless trees, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She'd lost too much in her life. Her husband, her savings, her dreams. She wasn't losing her son, too. Back in the clearing, Jamal's hands were clammy, the journal open in front of him. Clara's words stared back. "They don't leave. They change." He didn't know what it meant, but the clearing was starting to feel like a trap. The trees seemed to shift when he wasn't looking, their branches closing in. He found a mark on the ground, half hidden under pine needles, a spiral, like the ones Jake had seen. His breath caught. He wasn't alone. Footsteps crunched behind him, slow and deliberate. He turned, knife raised, expecting the man in the gray jacket. But it was Margaret, her face pale, her eyes wide. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice urgent. "Not yet." Jamal's mouth went dry. "You told me to come," he said, confused. She shook her head. "I told you to be careful. You don't understand what this place is." Before he could ask, she grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the trees. "We need to go. Now." But as they moved, the air grew colder, the hum Jake had heard starting low, rising like a warning. Jake was running now, the ridge behind him, the two wooden figures in his pocket bouncing against his leg. The shadow he'd seen wasn't there anymore, but the feeling of being watched was stronger, like eyes boring into his back. He'd found something else by the cairn, a piece of metal, rusted but unmistakable, part of Ethan's hunting rifle, the barrel bent like it had been crushed. His mind raced. Sarah's jacket, Ethan's gun. What was this place? He stumbled down the trail, thorns tearing at his clothes, the hum following him, louder now, almost words. He thought of Amos's story, the hunter who'd taken a figure and vanished. Was that happening to him? He reached the clearing, the same one Jamal was in, though he didn't know it yet. The air was wrong, heavier, and he saw something new, a faint path leading out, marked by another spiral scratched into a tree. He followed it, heart pounding, not noticing the figure watching from the ridge above. In Millinocket, Sheriff Danvers was starting to worry. Jake hadn't checked in, and the kid had been reckless lately, sneaking off to the woods alone. Danvers had known Sarah and Ethan, had promised their families he'd find them. He felt like he'd failed. When a call came in about a woman asking questions, Denise, looking for her son, Danvers's gut twisted. Another kid, another mystery. He met Denise at the station, her eyes red from crying, her voice steady despite it. "My boy's out there, chasing something," she said, showing him the bus receipt. Danvers recognized the name, Jamal. The deputy had mentioned him, the kid asking about the clearing. "He's not the only one," Danvers said, grabbing his coat. He didn't know how, but he felt it. The forest was pulling people in again, and he wasn't sure he could stop it. Jamal and Margaret were moving fast now, the clearing behind them, but the shadow kept pace, flickering in and out of sight. Margaret's grip on his arm was tight, her face set. "You don't get it," she said, her voice low. "This place, it takes what it wants." Jamal pulled away, angry. "Then why send me here? What's this about Sarah and Ethan?" Margaret stopped, her eyes darting to the trees. "They're part of it," she said. "But it's not just them. It's been happening for years. Clara tried to warn people, and so did I." She pointed to the journal in his bag. "Read it. All of it. But not here." Before Jamal could argue, he saw it, a shadow moving between the trees, tall and thin, like Jake's. His blood ran cold. Margaret saw it too, her face paling. "Run," she whispered, but her voice was drowned out by the hum, now so loud it shook the ground. Jake was on the new path, the spiral mark guiding him deeper into the woods. The air was thick, almost liquid, and the trees seemed to bend toward him, their branches clawing at the sky. The wooden figures in his pocket felt hot, burning through his jacket. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't stop. Sarah's jacket, Ethan's gun, they were here, somewhere. He called their names, his voice hoarse, but the hum swallowed it. Then he saw it. Another cairn, bigger this time, stones stacked high, surrounded by more spirals carved into the ground. And there, at its base, was something that stopped him cold. A backpack, torn and weathered, with Sarah's initials stitched on the strap. He dropped to his knees, tearing it open, finding her journal inside, pages filled with sketches of the same symbols he'd found. The last entry was dated October 15th, 2022, the day they vanished. "We found something. It's watching us." Jake's hands shook. He looked up, and the shadow was there, closer now, its edges blurring into the trees. Denise and Danvers were on the road to the trailhead, her car bouncing over the uneven dirt. She told him everything, Jamal's note, his strange behavior, the man in the gray jacket. Danvers listened, his jaw tight. He'd heard rumors about that man, a drifter who'd been seen around Millinocket years ago, always near the woods, never staying long. No one knew his name, but he'd been spotted after other disappearances, like a ghost tied to the forest. Danvers didn't believe in ghosts, but he was starting to wonder. He radioed for backup, told Denise to stay in the car when they reached the trailhead. She refused, her eyes fierce. "That's my son," she said. "I'm going." Danvers didn't argue. They grabbed flashlights and started up the trail, the forest swallowing them as the hum began, faint at first, growing louder with every step. Jamal and Margaret were running now, the clearing far behind, but the shadow kept pace, flickering in and out of sight. The journal slapped against Jamal's side, its pages full of warnings he hadn't read yet. Margaret was panting, her age showing, but she didn't slow down. "It's not human," she gasped, dodging a root. It never was. Jamal wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the hum was deafening, vibrating in his chest. He saw another spiral on a tree, glowing faintly in the dusk, like it was carved with light. He stumbled, his knife falling, and when he turned to grab it, the shadow was there, tall, thin, faceless, standing just beyond the trees. Margaret yanked him forward, her voice sharp. "Don't look at it." But he couldn't help it. Its edges seemed to ripple, like it wasn't fully there, and for a second, he swore he saw Sarah's face in its form, her eyes pleading. Then it was gone, and the hum stopped, leaving only silence and the pounding of his heart. Jake was at the cairn, Sarah's journal open in his hands, the words blurring as his eyes filled with tears. "It's watching us." What had they found? He tore through the pages, finding more sketches, spirals, circles, figures like the ones in his pocket. One page had a map, crude but clear, leading deeper into the woods, to a place marked the heart. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew he had to go. The shadow was closer now, not moving but watching, its presence like a weight on his chest. He stuffed the journal in his bag, grabbed the backpack, and started toward the heart, the hum rising again, louder, angrier. He didn't see Jamal and Margaret, didn't know they were close, but he felt something, a pull, like the forest was guiding him to where all the answers waited. Denise and Danvers reached the clearing, flashlights cutting through the dusk. The air was wrong, heavy, and Denise felt it, like a mother's instinct screaming that Jamal was near. Danvers saw the spirals on the trees, his face grim. "This isn't right," he muttered, his hand on his gun. They heard the hum, faint but growing, and Denise's heart raced. "Jamal," she called, her voice breaking. No answer, but the hum got louder, the trees seeming to shake with it. Danvers grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We need to be careful," he said, but she shook him off, running toward the sound. She didn't see the shadow, didn't know what was waiting, but she knew her son was out there and nothing would stop her. The forest was closing in, the hum a roar now, pulling Jake, Jamal, Margaret, Denise, and Danvers toward something none of them could name. The cairns, the spirals, the figures, they were all pointing to the heart, a place where the woods held their darkest secrets. Sarah and Ethan were there, or what was left of them, and the shadow was watching, waiting. What was it? What did it want? And how were these people, strangers connected by chance, tied to its plan? The tension is unbearable, isn't it? We're right at the edge, the truth so close but still out of reach. Subscribe, hit that bell, and let's step into the heart together. What's waiting there? Drop your guesses below. This is about to get wild. The forest roared with that unearthly hum, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, vibrating through the trees and into the bones of everyone caught in its grip. Jake clutched Sarah's backpack, his sister's journal pressed against his chest as he stumbled toward the placer map called the Heart. The shadow was closer now, its form flickering at the edge of his vision, not quite solid but too real to ignore. He didn't know what it was, Sarah, Ethan, or something worse, but every step felt like he was being pulled deeper into a trap he couldn't escape. The spirals carved into the trees glowed faintly, pulsing with a hum, like they were alive. His heart pounded, the wooden figures in his pocket burning hot, and he swore he heard Sarah's voice, faint and desperate, calling his name. He pushed forward, thorns tearing at his skin, driven by the need to find her, to understand what the forest had taken. Jamal and Margaret were running blind, the clearing a distant memory, the shadow trailing them like a predator. The hum was deafening, shaking the ground, and Jamal's legs burned as he struggled to keep up with Margaret, who moved with a speed that defied her age. "What is it?" he gasped, dodging a branch. Margaret's face was grim, her eyes darting to the trees. "It's the Guardian," she said, her voice barely audible over the noise. "It's always been here." Jamal's mind reeled. The journal had mentioned guardians, but he'd thought it was folklore, not this, something real, something chasing them. He glanced back, and there it was, the shadow, closer now, its form shifting, showing glimpses of faces, Sarah's, Ethan's, others he didn't know. "Keep moving," Margaret shouted, but Jamal froze, his eyes locked on the shadow. For a second, it wasn't Sarah's face he saw, it was Emily's, the woman from the bus, her eyes pleading. His stomach dropped. How was she part of this? Denise and Sheriff Danvers were deep in the woods now, the trailhead far behind, their flashlights barely cutting through the thickening dusk. The hum was louder here, a physical force that made Denise's teeth ache. She called Jamal's name again, her voice raw, but the forest swallowed it. Danvers was tense, his gun drawn, his eyes scanning the trees. He'd seen the spirals, recognized them from old reports, disappearances, decades ago, tied to these woods. He hadn't believed the stories then, but now, with the air pressing down and the hum shaking his chest, he wasn't so sure. "Stay close," he told Denise, but she was already moving, driven by a mother's instinct. She saw something, a mark on a tree, an arrow, glowing faintly. "Jamal's here," she whispered, her heart racing. Danvers grabbed her arm, his face pale. "We're not alone," he said, his voice low. He'd seen it too, the shadow, flickering just beyond the light. Then came the twist, the moment that turned everything upside down. Jake reached the heart, a place where the trees parted to reveal a sunken hollow, ringed by stones carved with spirals and figures. In the center stood a tree unlike any other, massive, twisted, its bark black and slick, pulsing with the hum. At its base was a pile of objects, clothes, gear, personal things like offerings. Jake recognized some of it. Ethan's watch, Sarah's scarf, even Rusty's old leash. His breath caught. But what stopped him cold was the figure kneeling by the tree, not a shadow but a man, his back to Jake, his hands digging in the dirt. He wore a gray jacket, and Jake's blood ran cold. The drifter Danvers had mentioned, the one tied to other disappearances, was he here? Jake gripped his knife, stepping closer, but the man turned, and Jake's world tilted. It wasn't a stranger. It was Ethan, older, thinner, his eyes hollow and wild, like he'd seen things no one should. "You shouldn't be here, Jake," he said, his voice rough, almost inhuman. "She's not yours anymore." Jamal and Margaret stumbled into a ravine, the shadow momentarily gone, but the hum was relentless, shaking the earth. Margaret was panting, her face slick with sweat. "We can't outrun it," she said, her voice breaking. "Not forever." Jamal's hands shook as he pulled the journal from his bag, desperate for answers. He flipped to a page he'd skimmed before, a sketch of the twisted tree Jake had just found, labeled the heart. Clara's notes were frantic. "The guardian feeds on choices. It takes what you give." Jamal's heart sank. Choices? Was that why Emily gave him the note? Had he chosen this by coming here? He looked at Margaret, who was staring at him, her eyes filled with something like guilt. "You knew," he said, his voice trembling. "You knew what this was." Margaret's lips tightened, but before she could answer, the shadow appeared at the ravine's edge, its form clearer now. Not just Sarah or Emily, but dozens of faces, all pleading, all trapped. And then Margaret did something Jamal didn't expect. She stepped toward it, her hands raised. "Take me," she said, her voice steady. "Not him." Denise and Sheriff Danvers were closing in, the hum so loud it drowned out everything else. Denise saw the spirals everywhere now, on trees, rocks, even the ground, glowing like they were guiding her to Jamal. She didn't care about the shadow, didn't care about Danvers's warnings. She only cared about her son. But Danvers stopped, his flashlight catching something in the underbrush, a notebook, old and weathered, with Clara's name on the cover. He picked it up, his hands shaking, and read the first page. "The guardian isn't one. It's many. It's us." His stomach dropped. He'd heard the stories, dismissed them, but now, with the hum shaking his bones and the shadow flickering closer, he understood. The forest wasn't just taking people, it was changing them, turning them into something else. He looked at Denise, who was staring at the notebook, her face pale. "What does it mean?" she asked, but before he could answer, they heard a scream, Jamal's voice, raw and terrified, coming from deeper in the woods. Jake was frozen, staring at Ethan, his mind refusing to process what he saw. Ethan alive, but not the Ethan he knew. His face was gaunt, his hands stained with dirt, and his eyes, they weren't right, too dark, too deep, like they held the forest itself. "Where's Sarah?" Jake demanded, his knife raised, but his voice shook. Ethan smiled, a twisted thing that didn't reach his eyes. "She's here," he said, pointing to the tree. "She's always been here." Jake's eyes followed, and he saw it, a shape in the bark, faint but unmistakable, Sarah's face, carved or grown, her eyes closed, her mouth open in a silent scream. He staggered back, the journal falling from his hands. "What did you do?" he whispered. Ethan stood, stepping closer, his voice low. "What we had to stay. You can too, Jake. Just choose." The hum surged, the tree pulsing, and Jake felt it, a pull, like the forest was reaching into his mind, offering something he didn't understand but couldn't resist. Jamal's scream echoed through the ravine as Margaret faced the shadow, her arms outstretched. He lunged for her, but she pushed him back, her eyes fierce. "You're not ready," she said. "You still have a choice." The shadow surged forward, its faces swirling, and for a second, Jamal saw Margaret's among them, younger, smiling, like she'd been part of this before. The hum stopped, the air still, and the shadow enveloped her, her body fading into its form. Jamal fell to his knees, the journal open beside him, Clara's words staring back. "The guardian takes what you offer, but it never stops wanting." He scrambled to his feet, running blindly, the forest closing in, the spirals glowing brighter, leading him toward the heart. He didn't know Margaret was gone, didn't know what she'd done, but he felt it, a shift, like the forest had tasted blood and was hungry for more. Denise and Danvers ran toward the scream, the notebook in Danvers's hand, its words burning in his mind. The shadow was everywhere now, flickering in and out, its faces shifting, Sarah, Ethan, Margaret, and others, too many to count. Denise didn't see them, didn't care. She only saw the path ahead, the spirals guiding her to Jamal. Danvers shouted for her to stop, but she was too fast, her flashlight bouncing as she ran. He followed, his gun useless against the hum, the forest, the truth he was starting to grasp. The notebook had mentioned a tree, a heart, a place where choices were made. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew they were close, too close. As they reached the hollow, the hum peaked, a sound that wasn't sound but feeling, and Danvers saw it. The twisted tree, pulsing, surrounded by stones and relics. And there, standing by it, was Ethan, his eyes dark, and Jake, his knife raised, frozen in fear. Jamal burst into the hollow, his breath ragged, the journal clutched in his hands. He saw the tree, the stones, the relics, and then he saw Jake and Ethan, locked in a standoff he didn't understand. The hum was unbearable, the spirals glowing so bright they hurt his eyes. He didn't see Denise or Danvers, didn't know they were seconds away, but he felt the forest's pull, the same one Jake felt, urging him to choose. Ethan turned, his hollow eyes locking onto Jamal. "You're late," he said, echoing Margaret's words, and Jamal's blood ran cold. The shadow appeared behind Ethan, its faces swirling, and for a second, Jamal saw his own, young and scared, staring back. The tree pulsed, the hum roared, and the forest waited, hungry for their choices, ready to claim them all. The stakes are higher than ever, aren't they? Ethan, alive but changed, tied to a tree that holds Sarah's face. Margaret, gone, taken by the shadow she tried to face. Jamal, Jake, Denise, and Danvers, all converging on the heart, where the forest demands a choice none of them understand. What's the guardian? What does it want? And how is Emily tied to this nightmare? We're teetering on the edge, the climax so close you can feel it. Subscribe, hit that bell, and let's face the heart together. Drop your theories below. What's happening in these woods? The truth is coming, and it's gonna shake you. The hollow pulsed with the hum, a deafening roar that shook the earth beneath the twisted tree, its black bark gleaming like it was alive. Jake stood frozen, his knife trembling as he faced Ethan, whose hollow eyes held no trace of the man he'd once known. Sarah's face in the tree's bark stared back, her silent scream etched into the wood, and Jake's heart tore apart. Jamal burst into the scene, clutching Clara's journal, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with terror as he saw Ethan and the shadow looming behind him, its swirling faces, Sarah, Emily, Margaret, and now his own, taunting him. The spirals carved into the stones glowed brighter, the air thick with a force that pulled at their minds, urging them to choose. Denise and Sheriff Danvers crashed through the trees, flashlights cutting through the dusk, Denise's voice breaking as she screamed Jamal's name. The forest had drawn them all to the heart, demanding its price, and the climax was here, raw and unstoppable. Ethan's voice cut through the hum, low and eerie, like it came from the tree itself. "You can't leave," he said, his gaze shifting between Jake and Jamal. "Not now. She needs you." Jake's stomach twisted. "Who's she?" he shouted, stepping closer, his knife raised. Ethan pointed to the tree, where Sarah's face seemed to shimmer, her eyes flickering open for a second, pleading. "The Guardian," Ethan whispered. "She's always hungry." Jamal's hands shook as he opened the journal, Clara's words screaming from the page. "The Guardian feeds on choices. Offer yourself, or it takes everyone." He looked at Ethan, at the relics piled at the tree's base, Sarah's scarf, Ethan's watch, Rusty's leash, and understood. Ethan had chosen to stay, to give himself to the Guardian, and Sarah had paid the price.
But why?
And how was Jamal part of this? Denise reached Jamal, grabbing his arm, tears streaming down her face. "We're leaving," she said, her voice fierce, but Jamal pulled away, his eyes locked on the tree. "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. "It's not done." Danvers stepped forward, his gun trained on Ethan, his face grim. "Step away, son," he said, but Ethan laughed, a hollow sound that chilled the air. "You can't shoot it," he said. "It's not me anymore." The shadow surged, its faces swirling faster, and the hum peaked, a sound that wasn't sound but pain, forcing everyone to their knees. Jake dropped his knife, clutching his head, Sarah's voice echoing in his mind. "Choose, Jake. Save me." Jamal felt it too, Emily's face in the shadow, her voice clear. "You were chosen." Denise screamed, fighting the hum, her hands reaching for Jamal, but the forest was stronger, its will crushing theirs. Then Jamal saw it, a line in the journal, scrawled in Clara's frantic hand. "The Guardian can be stopped. Break the heart." He looked at the tree, its pulsing bark, the relics, the spirals. It wasn't just a tree. It was the Guardian's anchor, the source of its power. He grabbed a rock from the ground, heavy and sharp, and ran toward the tree, ignoring Denise's cries. Ethan lunged, his hands clawing at Jamal, but Jake tackled him, pinning him to the ground. "Do it!" Jake shouted, his voice raw, tears streaming as he looked at Sarah's face in the bark. Jamal swung the rock, smashing it into the tree, the bark cracking like bone. The hum faltered, the shadow wavering, and the spirals dimmed. He hit again, harder, and the tree groaned, a sound like a dying animal, black sap oozing from the wound. The shadow screamed, its faces dissolving, Sarah, Emily, Margaret, all of them, into a formless mass. Ethan writhed under Jake, his eyes clearing for a second, human again. "I'm sorry," he gasped, his voice breaking. "I thought I could save her." The tree shuddered, Sarah's face fading, her scream silenced as the bark split open, revealing a hollow core filled with relics, bones, and something else, a pulsing light, like a heartbeat. Jamal dropped the rock, his hands shaking, and reached for the light, not knowing why, but feeling it was right. His fingers brushed it, and the hum stopped, the shadow collapsing into nothing, the spirals going dark. The forest was silent, the air light again, but the cost was heavy. Ethan went limp, his eyes empty, his body still. Sarah's face was gone. The tree just a tree now, broken and dead. Denise pulled Jamal into her arms, sobbing, her hands checking him for injuries. Jake staggered to his feet, staring at the tree, his sister's journal at his feet, its pages fluttering in the breeze. Danvers lowered his gun, his face pale, Clara's notebook still in his hand. "It's over," he said, but his voice shook, like he didn't believe it. Jamal looked at the journal, at Clara's final words. "Break the heart, but it always finds another." He felt a chill, even as Denise held him tight. The guardian was gone, the forest quiet, but something lingered, a feeling, a whisper, like the woods weren't done with them. They gathered their things, helping each other out of the hollow. The relics left behind, the tree a shattered husk. Sarah and Ethan were gone, their fate sealed by choices made years ago, but Jake and Jamal were alive, their lives forever changed by a mystery that had pulled them together. As they reached the trailhead, the first stars appearing above, the final twist hit like a cold wind. Denise, still holding Jamal's hand, stopped, her eyes wide. "Your pocket," she said, pointing to his jacket. Jamal frowned, reaching in, and pulled out a small, blackened wooden figure, identical to the ones Jake had found. His heart stopped. He hadn't taken it, hadn't seen it before, but there it was, featureless and heavy, like a promise. Jake saw it, his face paling, and Danvers swore under his breath. The journal's words echoed in Jamal's mind. "It always finds another." The guardian was gone, its heart broken, but the forest wasn't finished. Somewhere, deep in the woods, a new tree was growing, a new heart forming, and the hum, faint but real, started again, calling for its next choice. The mystery of Sarah and Ethan was solved, their loss a wound that would never heal, but the forest's secrets were far from over. Jake, Jamal, Denise, and Danvers walked away, their steps heavy, the wooden figure in Jamal's hand a reminder that some choices can't be undone. What was the guardian? Why did it choose them? And who's next? We've reached the climax, but the story's not done. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's keep chasing the truth. Drop your thoughts below. What's the forest planning now? The next twist is waiting, and it's gonna haunt you. The trailhead was quiet under the starlit sky, the main woods finally still, but the weight of that blackened wooden figure in Jamal's hand lingered like a shadow. He stared at it, its featureless form cold against his palm, as Denise gripped his arm, her eyes searching his face for answers she didn't want to hear. Jake walked beside them, Sarah's journal tucked under his arm, his face hollow with grief. Sheriff Danvers led the way, Clara's notebook in his hand, his jaw tight as he scanned the trees, half expecting the hum to start again. The guardian was gone, its heart shattered in the hollow, but Clara's words, "It always finds another," hung over them like a curse. The mystery of Sarah and Ethan was solved, their tragic choice to stay with the forest's guardian sealing their fate, but the wooden figure was a chilling reminder that the woods weren't done. As they reached Danvers's truck, the group paused, catching their breath, each grappling with what they'd seen and what it meant for their lives. Jamal broke the silence, his voice shaky. "What do we do with this?" he asked, holding up the figure. Denise's face paled, and she reached for it, but Danvers stopped her. "Don't touch it," he said, his voice low. "We don't know what it means." Jake looked at the figure, his mind flashing to the ones he'd found on the ridge, now lost in the chaos of the hollow. "It's a marker," he said, echoing Amos's warning. "It means the forest still wants something." Denise shook her head, tears welling.
"No.
"We're done with this place. We're going home." But Jamal couldn't look away from the figure, remembering Emily's face in the shadow, her voice saying, "You were chosen." Why him? Why any of them? He slipped the figure back into his pocket, not sure why, but feeling it wasn't time to let it go. The drive back to Millinocket was heavy with silence, the truck's headlights cutting through the fog. Danvers dropped them at the sheriff's station, where Denise's rental car waited. He promised to handle Ethan's body, to tell the families what he could without mentioning the guardian or the tree. "Some things are better left unsaid," he muttered, but his eyes betrayed his fear. Jake nodded, knowing the truth would only hurt more. Sarah and Ethan were gone, consumed by a choice Jake would never fully understand. He hugged Danvers, a rare moment of vulnerability, and promised to call if he found anything else. Denise insisted Jamal come with her, but he hesitated, looking at Jake. "We need to figure this out," he said, his voice firm despite the tremble. "The forest, it's not over." Denise sighed, exhausted but proud, and agreed to stay one more night. At a small motel on the edge of town, Jamal and Jake sat on the curb, the journal and notebook between them, piecing together the fragments. Clara's notes were clearer now. The guardian wasn't a spirit or a monster, but a force born from the choices of those who entered the woods. It fed on sacrifice, offering survival in exchange for something deeper, your humanity, your freedom. Sarah and Ethan had stumbled into it, maybe drawn by the same symbols Jake had found. Ethan chose to stay, thinking he could save Sarah, but the guardian took them both, weaving them into its shadow. Margaret, too, had known, her sacrifice in the ravine a desperate attempt to spare Jamal. And Emily, Jamal's heart ached as he realized she was no messenger, but another victim, her note a cry for help, a warning passed on before the forest claimed her. Jake flipped through Sarah's journal, stopping at a sketch of the twisted tree, her handwriting shaky. "It promises you'll stay together. Don't believe it." He closed his eyes, tears falling. "She tried to warn us," he said. Jamal nodded, thinking of Emily's eyes on the bus, her urgency. They all did. They decided to burn the figure, hoping to break its hold. In the motel parking lot, they built a small fire in a metal trash can, the wooden figure catching quickly, its black surface cracking as it burned. The flames flickered, and for a second, Jamal swore he saw Emily's face, smiling, free. The hum didn't return, and the air felt lighter, but both boys knew it wasn't enough. The forest was vast, its secrets older than Clara, older than the legends Amos told. They couldn't burn it all. Denise watched from the motel room, her heart heavy but full. She'd almost lost Jamal, but he'd come back stronger, braver than she'd ever imagined. She called Marcus, promising they'd be home soon, and started planning their return to Atlanta. Jake, too, was ready to leave Millinocket, but not the fight. He'd go back to college, study history, maybe archaeology, to understand the symbols the cairns, the forests pull. He gave Danvers Amos's map, asking him to keep an eye on the woods. Danvers agreed, though his tired eyes said he'd seen enough. The sheriff would quietly warn hikers away from the clearing, the ridge, the heart, knowing he couldn't stop the curious, but hoping to spare them. As dawn broke, Jamal and Denise drove south, the wooden figure's ashes left behind, but its weight still in Jamal's heart. He'd never forget the shadow, the hum, or the faces, Emily's, Margaret's, Sarah's. Back in Atlanta, he'd work harder, save for college, but he'd also dig into the stories, the disappearances, the choices that fed the Guardian. Jake stayed in touch, sending articles about Algonquin legends, old maps, anything that might explain what they'd faced. Together, they vowed to warn others, to keep the forest's secrets from claiming more lives. The subplots, Denise's fear, Danvers's guilt, Amos's warnings, found closure in their shared resolve to move forward, to honor the lost by living. The takeaway was clear. Some mysteries can't be fully solved, some choices can't be undone, but courage and connection can break even the darkest cycles. The forest was quiet now, its heart broken, but somewhere, a new tree might grow, a new hum might start. Jamal and Jake would be ready, their bond forged in the hollow, their story a warning and a promise. As the credits roll on this tale, the woods remain, watching, waiting. Subscribe, hit that bell, and share your thoughts below. What would you choose in the heart? The mystery's closed, but the forest never forgets.